The night I turned 18 should have been filled with candles, laughter, and the warm certainty that no matter how difficult life became, I would always have a place to call home. Instead, I stood in our living room clutching a small duffel bag while my older sister folded her arms across her expensive sweater and looked at me, as if I were something she wanted scrubbed out of the family, forever. Either she goes, Vanessa said, her voice calm enough to make it sound reasonable, or I do. Silence settled over the room like fresh snow. I looked from my father to my mother, waiting for one of them to laugh and tell her she was being ridiculous. No one laughed. My mother stared at the floor. My father rubbed his forehead as though the greatest burden in his life was having to choose between his daughters. I swallowed hard. Dad? He wouldn't meet my eyes. You know she's lying. I don't know what to believe anymore, Emma. That hurt more than anything Vanessa had ever done. For years she had quietly poisoned every relationship I had inside that house. If money disappeared from Mom's purse, somehow it became my fault. If a vase broke, Vanessa had always seen me near it. If my grades were better than hers, she'd tell everyone I cheated. If a boy from school spoke to me, she'd whisper to our parents that I was chasing attention. She never screamed. She never lost control. She smiled. That was what made her dangerous. People believed smiles. I had spent years defending myself against accusations I never understood. You really think I stole from you? I asked my mother. She wiped away a tear. I don't know. I felt something inside me crack. Vanessa stepped closer. You've caused enough problems. Dad and Mom deserve peace. Peace, she called destroying my life peace. I didn't do anything. She shrugged. That's not what everyone thinks. Dad finally spoke. Maybe some time apart is what this family needs. I laughed. It sounded strange even to me. So this is it, on my birthday? He reached into his wallet and pulled out $200. I'll help however I can. I stared at the bills. $200. Apparently that was the price of 18 years of being his daughter. I left the money sitting on the coffee table. I hope one day, I whispered, you remember this moment. Neither of them stopped me. Neither of them chased after me. The front door closed behind me with a sound I would hear in my nightmares for years. That first night I slept on a bus bench because every shelter nearby was full. I wrapped my thin jacket around myself and cried until there were no tears left. I wasn't crying because I was homeless. I was crying because somewhere inside me I still believed my father would drive around looking for me. He never did. The next morning I walked into a diner and asked if they needed help. The owner, Mrs. Delgado, looked at my exhausted face for a long moment. You eaten today? I shook my head. She pointed toward the kitchen. Breakfast first. Then we'll talk. That simple act of kindness nearly broke me. I worked there washing dishes until my fingers cracked from hot water and soap. At night I rented the cheapest room I could find above an old laundromat. The ceiling leaked whenever it rained. The heater barely worked. But nobody there called me a liar. That alone made it feel safer than home. Weeks became months. Months became years. I took online classes after work, then community college, then university through scholarships and endless overtime shifts. I barely slept. Whenever I wanted to quit, I remembered Vanessa's face. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I refused to let her become the author of my future. Mrs. Delgado often found me studying after closing. You know, she said one night while handing me fresh coffee, some people spend their lives proving others wrong. I nodded. I know, she smiled gently. The happiest people spend their lives proving themselves right. That sentence stayed with me. Little by little, I stopped imagining my parents apologizing. I stopped wondering if my phone would ring. I stopped expecting birthday cards. Eventually, I even stopped checking social media to see pictures of family holidays where my place at the table had quietly disappeared. I built a new life. After graduating with honors in finance, I joined a struggling investment firm as the youngest analyst they'd ever hired. Everyone underestimated me. I liked that. When people underestimate you, they rarely notice how quickly you're climbing. Within 6 years I became partner. By the 8th year I helped negotiate acquisitions worth hundreds of millions. At 28 I founded my own private investment company. People called me brilliant. The truth was simpler. I knew exactly what it felt like to lose everything. That made risk less frightening. By the time I turned 28, magazines were asking for interviews. Business conferences invited me to speak. People applauded the woman who had built herself from nothing. None of them knew there had once been an 18-year-old girl crying on a bus bench with nowhere to go. Mrs. Delgado knew. She sat in the front row during my first keynote speech. Afterward she hugged me and whispered, "Your parents would be proud." I smiled politely. "I hope they're healthy." That was all I could honestly say. Deep inside, the wound had scarred over. It no longer bled, but scars remember. 10 years after I walked out of that house, my assistant stepped into my office carrying a folder. We've completed the preliminary review on the Harrison estate. I glanced at the paperwork. The address froze me. My childhood home. I hadn't spoken that street name aloud in a decade. The owners are facing foreclosure, my assistant explained. Medical debt, unpaid taxes, and several loans. The property will likely be sold unless someone purchases the outstanding obligations. I stared through the office window. Thousands of people hurried below, unaware that my past had just knocked on the glass. Who owns it now? My records show Richard and Helen Carter, my parents. I closed the folder. Anything else? She hesitated. The file mentions another resident. My heartbeat slowed. Who? Vanessa Carter. The name settled over the room like an old ghost that had finally found me again. For a long moment I said nothing. The frightened 18-year-old inside me wanted to slam the folder shut and forget they existed. The woman I had become understood something different. Life had quietly brought us back to the same crossroads. Only this time, I was the one holding the future in my hands. I left the folder unopened for the rest of the afternoon. The numbers on my computer screen blurred together, but I wasn't thinking about investment portfolios or board meetings. I was back in that living room, watching my father look away while my mother silently cried. I could still hear Vanessa's voice, calm and confident, delivering the sentence that had stolen my home. Either she goes or I do. For 10 years I had imagined every possible reunion. Sometimes my parents begged for forgiveness. Sometimes I ignored them. Sometimes I simply walked away. None of those fantasies prepared me for the reality that they weren't searching for me at all. They were drowning, and fate had quietly placed the rope in my hands. Should we move forward with the acquisition? My assistant asked before leaving for the evening. I'll handle this one personally. She nodded without asking why. The next morning I drove to the neighborhood where I'd grown up. Everything looked smaller. The maple tree I'd climbed as a child towered over the cracked sidewalk, but the house itself had aged badly, paint peeled from the walls. The porch leaned slightly to one side. Weeds had swallowed the flower beds my mother once tended with pride. A rusted sedan sat in the driveway. I stayed inside my car for several minutes. This place had once held every memory I'd ever known. Now it felt like someone else's life. Just as I reached for the door handle, the front door opened. My father stepped outside carrying 2 heavy trash bags. For a moment I didn't recognize him. His shoulders had collapsed inward. His dark hair had turned almost completely white. The confident man who had once seemed larger than life now moved slowly, favoring one knee. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired sleep could fix. The kind life carved into people. He didn't notice me. I watched him drag the bags toward the curb before coughing so hard he had to steady himself against the mailbox. Something twisted inside my chest. I hadn't expected pity. I certainly hadn't wanted it. I drove away before he could see me. Back at the office I ordered a complete financial investigation. The report arrived 2 days later. It answered questions I hadn't even thought to ask. My father's construction business had collapsed 4 years earlier after a trusted partner disappeared with company funds. My mother had undergone multiple surgeries for a heart condition. Insurance covered only part of the treatment. The debts multiplied. Their savings disappeared. Then came the detail that made me stop reading. Vanessa. She hadn't simply stayed with them. She had convinced them to refinance the house twice to finance a luxury boutique she claimed would support the family. The business failed within 18 months. She blamed the economy. Then she persuaded them to co-sign personal loans. Those loans funded expensive vacations, designer clothes, and a lifestyle she posted proudly online while creditors called the house every day. There were pages of unpaid balances, credit cards, private lenders, medical bills, tax notices. Each document painted the same picture. My parents hadn't lost everything because of bad luck. They had spent 10 years believing the wrong daughter. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time, anger wasn't the strongest emotion I felt. It was sadness. Not because they were suffering. Because they had willingly handed the knife to the person who eventually stabbed them. A week later my lawyer entered my office. The foreclosure auction is scheduled for next month. I don't want the house. He looked surprised. Then why the investigation? I want every debt purchased. Every debt, every legal claim, every outstanding loan, every tax obligation quietly. He smiled. That gives you considerable leverage. I know. What are you planning? I looked out the window. I'm planning to tell the truth. The transactions took less than 3 weeks. Through several holding companies, my firm legally acquired nearly every debt connected to the property. No one connected those companies to me, especially not Vanessa. Then something unexpected happened. One Friday afternoon my receptionist called. There's a woman here insisting she knows you. Name? Vanessa Carter. I closed my eyes. So she finally found me. Should I send her away? I thought about it. No, 5 minutes. When she entered my office, I barely recognized her. She still dressed in expensive clothes, but they no longer fit the confident image she tried to project. Her makeup hid sleepless nights. Tiny lines surrounded her eyes. She smiled exactly the way she used to. The same rehearsed smile. Emma, I didn't stand. It's Miss Carter according to your appointment request. Her smile faltered. You've done well. I've been told. She looked around my office, admiring the skyline. I always knew you were ambitious. That was a lie. She had always called me boring. I assume you didn't come here to compliment the furniture. She laughed softly. Straight to business. I learned from watching you. For the first time she looked uncomfortable. She folded her hands together. I actually came because someone suggested your investment company buys distressed assets. We do. My parents are having some financial difficulties. I know. She blinked. You know, I read the reports. She leaned forward hopefully. Then maybe you can help us. Us, not them. Us. Interesting. What exactly do you want? She hesitated. A loan. What collateral? The house. It already has too much debt. Her expression tightened. You've always been good with numbers. I have. So, can you save it? There it was. The sister who had thrown me onto the street now sat in my office asking me to rescue the home she'd helped destroy. Life possessed a remarkable sense of irony. I have one question first. Anything. Why did you lie about me 10 years ago? Her face froze. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Silence. You accused me of stealing. No answer. You told Mom I manipulated people. Nothing. You convinced Dad I couldn't be trusted. She looked toward the window. We were kids. No, I leaned forward. You were 22. She swallowed. I made mistakes. Mistakes happen by accident. She said nothing. I lost my family because of choices you made deliberately. Her eyes hardened for a second. There she was. The real Vanessa, hidden beneath the practiced smile. You always thought you were better than me. The words slipped out before she could stop them. I almost laughed. So that's what this was about. You got better grades. I studied. Teachers loved you. I respected them. Mom always talked about how responsible you were. I stared at her in disbelief. So you destroyed my life because you were jealous? She looked away. I didn't think they'd actually throw you out. The room became painfully quiet after 10 years. That was her explanation. I didn't think they'd actually do it. No apology, no remorse, only surprise that our parents had believed her. I pressed a button on my desk. My assistant entered. Please escort Miss Carter out. Vanessa stood quickly. Wait, no, we'll lose the house. I know. My parents have nowhere else to go. I met her eyes. Neither did I. She opened her mouth but no words came. As security politely guided her toward the elevator, she turned back one last time. You've become cruel. I held her gaze without raising my voice. No, Vanessa. I remembered the freezing bus bench. The empty birthday, the silence that lasted a decade. I simply learned the difference between kindness and allowing someone to use it. After she left, my lawyer walked in carrying a thin folder. The foreclosure hearing has been moved up. When? Monday morning. I looked at the documents resting on my desk. Every legal right now belonged to my company. The judge would soon decide whether my parents lost their home forever. They still had no idea that the person with the greatest influence over their future was the daughter they had abandoned. And before that hearing began, there was one conversation that had waited 10 long years to finally happen. Monday morning arrived with a gray sky that matched the weight in my chest. I had spent 10 years imagining revenge as something that would make me feel victorious. Yet as my driver pulled up outside the courthouse, I realized revenge alone had never been what I wanted. I had wanted someone to believe me. Someone to say, we were wrong. Nothing could return the 18-year-old girl who had walked away carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a broken heart. Inside the courthouse, attorneys hurried through the halls while families sat on worn wooden benches waiting for their names to be called. I noticed my parents before they noticed me. My mother looked frail, her silver hair tied neatly behind her head. My father held her hand with fingers that trembled slightly. The confidence that had once defined him had long since disappeared. Vanessa stood a few feet away, tapping impatiently on her phone as though this were merely another inconvenience. When my mother finally looked up, her eyes settled on me. She froze. The color drained from her face. Emma? My father slowly turned. For several seconds none of us moved. He stared as though he were seeing a ghost. You, his voice cracked. You look, I smiled politely. I'm doing well. My mother burst into tears. Before she could reach me, Vanessa stepped between us. What are you doing here? I have business today. My attorney approached carrying several folders. Miss Carter, the judge is ready. Vanessa frowned. Ms. Carter? Confusion spread across my father's face. Then my attorney spoke words that changed the atmosphere completely. Our company currently owns the majority of the outstanding obligations attached to this property. Vanessa blinked. What company? He handed her a document. She read the first page. Her face turned pale. No, she looked at me. This is yours? Yes. My father stared at me in disbelief. You bought our debt? I purchased the legal claims. Vanessa's composure shattered. You planned this. I met her eyes calmly. No. You wanted revenge. I wanted the truth. The courtroom doors opened. Everyone entered. The hearing itself lasted less than 30 minutes. The judge reviewed the paperwork, confirmed the debts had been legally transferred, and then turned toward my attorney. Has your client reached a decision regarding foreclosure? Every eye in the room settled on me. I stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. The room became completely silent. I would like to withdraw the foreclosure request. Even the judge looked surprised. Instead, I requested a private settlement already prepared by my legal team. The judge reviewed the documents. Everything appears lawful. He approved the agreement. Outside the courtroom, Vanessa grabbed my arm. What did you do? I gave everyone a choice. She frowned. What choice? My attorney handed each of them identical envelopes. My father opened his first. His hands shook as he read. His eyes filled with tears. My mother covered her mouth. Vanessa quickly scanned her copy. What is this? I answered quietly. The truth. The agreement was simple. Every medical debt belonging to my parents would be paid in full. Every tax obligation would be cleared. The foreclosure would be cancelled. The house would remain in my parents' names. There was only one condition. Vanessa would receive nothing. No ownership. No financial assistance. No access to future support connected to the property. Every document she had signed using my parents' credit would be transferred solely into her legal responsibility where permitted by law. Everything had been prepared carefully. Nothing illegal. Nothing vindictive. Only accountability. You can't do this, Vanessa shouted. I already did. You'll ruin me. I looked at her steadily. No, Vanessa. I remembered standing in the cold outside my childhood home. You've been ruining yourself. She turned desperately toward our parents. Tell her. Neither of them spoke. For the first time in my life, they looked at me. Not through her. At me. My father folded the papers carefully. Then he whispered something I had waited 10 years to hear. I was wrong. Those 3 words struck harder than any revenge ever could. His shoulders collapsed. I failed you. My mother sobbed openly. We should have listened. I begged you to. She nodded, through her tears. I know. I kept telling the truth. I know. We chose the easier child. My father closed his eyes. And we lost the better one. Vanessa stared at them in disbelief. So you're taking her side now? My father's voice became unexpectedly firm. There are no sides anymore. He looked directly at her. There is only truth. She laughed bitterly. So after everything I've done for this family, my mother interrupted for the first time. What exactly did you do for us? Vanessa stopped speaking. My mother continued. Emma never asked us for anything. Another silence. You asked for everything. My father slowly removed a spare key from his keychain. He placed it into Vanessa's hand. You should find somewhere else to live. She stared at him. What? We've protected you from consequences your entire life. His voice trembled. We thought we were helping. He looked toward me. We were destroying both our daughters. Vanessa's eyes searched each of our faces, waiting for someone to change their mind. No one did. She threw the key onto the ground. You'll regret this. She stormed away without looking back. I watched her disappear through the courthouse doors. Oddly enough, I felt nothing. No joy, no satisfaction, only relief. Weeks passed. Contractors repaired my parents' house using money from the settlement allocated specifically for essential repairs. I never moved in. I never wanted the house. It belonged to memories I had already outgrown. Instead, I visited occasionally. The first dinner felt awkward. We spent several minutes talking about the weather because none of us knew how to discuss 10 years of silence. Eventually my father stood up. Without saying a word, he disappeared into the hallway. He returned carrying a dusty cardboard box. I found these in the attic. Inside were my childhood drawings, my school awards, birthday cards I'd made for them in elementary school. A tiny bracelet woven from colorful string. My mother smiled sadly. I couldn't throw them away. I ran my fingers across the faded paper. For years I had believed they forgot me completely. Perhaps forgetting had never been the hardest part. Living with what they had done was. Over the following months our conversations grew easier. Trust returned slowly, one honest moment at a time. Not because time heals everything. Because truth finally had room to breathe. One autumn afternoon my father asked the question he had avoided since our reunion. Why did you help us? I looked across the backyard where golden leaves drifted through the air. I almost didn't. He nodded. I wouldn't have blamed you. I know. So why? I smiled softly. Because I refused to become the person Vanessa always believed I was. He lowered his head. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I wasn't offering forgiveness. He looked surprised. I'm offering a chance. There is a difference. He understood exactly what I meant. Some wounds leave scars that never disappear. But scars don't have to control the future. A year later, Mrs. Delgado stood beside me as we opened a foundation dedicated to helping young adults who had been abandoned by their families. Emergency housing, scholarships, career mentoring, legal guidance. Every service I had desperately needed at 18. During the opening ceremony, reporters asked why the project mattered so much to me. I looked at the young faces gathered inside the building. Some frightened, some angry, some simply exhausted. Then I answered honestly, because being abandoned should never mean your story is over. Across the room, my parents quietly applauded. They weren't seated in the front row. They hadn't asked for recognition. They simply came to support the daughter they had finally learned to see. As for Vanessa, I heard only occasional rumors. She eventually found work in another city and spent years paying back the debts created by her own choices. I never contacted her. I never needed another confrontation. The greatest revenge had never been watching her lose everything. It was living a life she had tried so hard to prevent me from having. The frightened girl, who left home with nothing, had believed she was unwanted. The woman she became discovered something far more powerful. The people who refuse to see your worth do not decide your value. They only reveal the limits of their own vision. And every birthday since then, I celebrate with the family I chose, the people who stood beside me when I had nothing, and the quiet certainty that the door which closed behind me at 18 was never the end of my story. It was the beginning of the life I was always meant to build.